I discovered a tube of lubricant concealed in my wife's underwear drawer, and that's when I knew Margaret was being unfaithful. The revelation that her affair partner was Ryan, our daughter's husband, completely shattered my world. Margaret wasn't simply an unfaithful spouse, but a woman prepared to end her husband's life after almost 4 decades of marriage. They thought they could manipulate my existence for their benefit. What I ultimately did to both of them caused them tremendous anguish. My name is Christopher Harrison, and I'm going to share how I uncovered that my wife of 38 years was scheming to end my life to collect my life insurance payout. The betrayal itself was devastating, but discovering she was orchestrating this with our son-in-law nearly destroyed me completely. The first indication that something was amiss came on a Friday afternoon, when I found that tube of personal lubricant hidden among Margaret's undergarments. My blonde 59-year-old wife Margaret, who previously welcomed me home enthusiastically after my shifts at Home Depot, suddenly couldn't maintain eye contact with me. She constantly stayed glued to her phone, texting someone and concealing the screen whenever I approached. She began wearing costly perfume again, something she'd abandoned years earlier. Then there was Ryan Foster, our son-in-law. This 33-year-old landscaper who married our daughter Amanda had been appearing at our Tampa residence constantly, always offering various explanations. However, Ryan only visited when I was scheduled to work late. That particular Friday, I returned home early due to a severe headache and noticed Ryan's white pickup truck parked across the street. I entered our house quietly and heard voices emanating from the kitchen. When I walked in, Margaret jumped up so abruptly her chair scraped against the floor. Ryan was casually leaning against my counter, drinking coffee from my preferred mug. Margaret's voice was overly cheerful. Ryan displayed his easy smile and mentioned checking the irrigation system. The explanation seemed reasonable, yet something felt wrong. Ryan departed quickly, but I caught a meaningful look exchanged between them. That evening, Margaret seemed unusually attentive. She prepared my favorite pot roast and repeatedly asked about my headache. Her kindness felt performative, like she was overcompensating for something. The following morning, I was searching for my reading glasses when my fingers touched something that didn't belong among Margaret's silk undergarments. It was a tube of personal lubricant, expensive and high quality, still in its original packaging. Margaret and I hadn't been intimate in over 2 years, so why did she possess this and why was it concealed like a guilty secret? I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, my hands shaking. That discovery transformed everything. I needed concrete evidence. Monday morning, I kissed Margaret goodbye as usual, but everything felt different. During lunch, I drove to Radio Shack and purchased a small digital voice recorder with voice activation technology. That afternoon, I contacted Margaret and informed her I was working late that evening. She responded with what sounded like relief in her voice. At 5:30, instead of heading home, I parked 3 blocks away and walked back through our neighborhood. I entered through our back door, moving quietly. Working quickly, I found the ideal spot behind our living room bookshelf. The device was small enough to hide completely. I tested it once. The audio was crystal clear. My hands trembled as I set it up. The shower stopped. I quickly positioned the recorder and headed to the kitchen. When Margaret came downstairs, she looked stunning with makeup, styled hair, and a dress I hadn't seen in months. She mentioned meeting girlfriends for dinner. I nodded and kissed her cheek. As I drove away, I watched our house in the rearview mirror. Within 10 minutes, Ryan's white pickup truck turned onto our street. The next evening, I sat in my truck outside Home Depot, staring at the small digital recorder in my hands. The device showed 2 hours and 37 minutes of recorded conversation. Finally, I inserted the earphones and hit the button. At first there was just silence, then our front door opening. Margaret's voice was soft and intimate. Ryan apologized for being late. I fast-forwarded through small talk. Then Ryan's voice became more serious. He asked if she'd called the insurance company. My blood went cold. Margaret replied that she had, and the policy was definitely $500,000 with her as the sole beneficiary. Ryan asked if I suspected anything. Margaret said no, I was clueless. She said I had no idea she knew about my high blood pressure medication. I pressed pause, my hands shaking. I didn't have high blood pressure. Ryan was explaining that the pills he obtained from his contact at the pharmacy looked identical to my regular ones, but these would gradually increase my blood pressure to make it look like a natural heart attack. Margaret asked how long it would take. Ryan estimated 3 to 4 months. I felt like I was going to be sick. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning to murder me. Margaret said dreamily that with $500,000, they could disappear to Costa Rica. Ryan mentioned my daughter wouldn't suspect anything. Margaret said Amanda was too busy with her paramedic job and called me boring old Christopher. The casual way she dismissed our 38-year marriage cut deeper than any physical pain. Ryan asked about the house. Margaret said she'd sell it after a decent mourning period. There was a pause, then the sound of kissing. I sat in my truck and felt my entire world crumble. My wife wasn't just being unfaithful. She was planning to end my life for insurance money. With our son-in-law, the man married to our daughter. That night I flushed every pill down the toilet and lay awake while Margaret slept peacefully beside me. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated Christopher Harrison. They wanted to play games with my life. I was going to change the rules. After discovering their murder plot, I needed to know everything about Ryan Foster. The next morning I called in sick and parked outside Ryan's apartment complex. At 8:15, he emerged and climbed into his white pickup truck. I followed him. Ryan's first stop was a Publix grocery store. From there, Ryan drove to Palma Seca, an upscale neighborhood. He pulled into a beautiful Mediterranean house. A woman answered the door, older with silver hair and expensive clothes. She hugged Ryan intimately. It was Mrs. Helen Martinez, our neighbor. Ryan carried a grocery bag inside and didn't come out for over an hour. I followed him to Hyde Park, where another older woman greeted him with intimate familiarity. Then to West Chase, where a third woman practically pulled him inside. By noon, I'd watched Ryan visit 4 different women, all older and all wealthy. Ryan Foster wasn't just a landscaper. He was targeting older women with money. Ryan was systematically seducing wealthy women in their 50s and 60s. Margaret wasn't special. She was just another Mark. But Margaret was different. Margaret had a husband with a $500,000 life insurance policy who could be murdered. That afternoon I drove to Mrs. Martinez's house and knocked. I told her I needed to ask something and asked if she was involved with Ryan Foster. Her face went white, then red. I explained Ryan was married to my daughter and having an affair with my wife. She wasn't the only one. I asked if he'd requested money. The look on her face told me everything. Mrs. Martinez broke down crying, revealing she'd given him $15,000 over 6 months. I asked about her will. She admitted he'd helped her update it and made him a beneficiary for $25,000. Over the next 2 days, I investigated Ryan's other victims. Catherine Wong had given Ryan over $30,000. Barbara Thompson had been paying Ryan's rent for 8 months. Dorothy Sullivan had bought Ryan a new truck. Each woman thought she was Ryan's only love. Each had been manipulated into changing legal documents in Ryan's favor. But Margaret was the biggest prize. I estimated he'd stolen over $100,000. This couldn't just be about revenge. This had to be about protecting all of Ryan's victims. The plan forming in my mind was elegant in its simplicity. Ryan had used intimacy as a weapon. I was going to turn that weapon against them. I was going to make sure they were stuck together, literally. Industrial super glue from Home Depot. Once it bonded, it required professional medical intervention. It would be painful, humiliating, and impossible to hide. I needed maximum public exposure. I needed emergency responders. The smoke detector plan came to me while reviewing fire safety protocols. A triggered smoke alarm would bring the fire department. My daughter Amanda was a paramedic supervisor. There was a good chance she'd be on the responding team. Amanda would have to see her mother and husband in the most humiliating situation imaginable. But Amanda was also Ryan's victim. She deserved to know what kind of man she'd married. I spent the weekend gathering supplies, industrial super glue from our warehouse, a Bluetooth speaker, smoke detector batteries, and a remote trigger system. The hardest part was getting access to their meeting place, but they always used our house when I was supposedly working late. I tested every component. The smoke alarm would trigger, the Bluetooth speaker would broadcast sounds of distress. The fire department would respond. They'd find Ryan and Margaret stuck together with industrial adhesive, unable to separate or deny what they were doing. The entire neighborhood would witness their humiliation. Amanda would know the truth. Monday morning, I walked into Home Depot, knowing this might be my last day as just a retail manager. From our commercial supply room, I took industrial superglue. The label warned that skin contact required immediate medical attention. Perfect. From our security department, I borrowed a small Bluetooth speaker. During lunch, I installed a secondary smoke detector in our living room, controlled by a remote trigger. Margaret and Ryan met every Tuesday. Tomorrow, their routine would become their trap. That evening, I tested everything in my garage. Tuesday morning, I contacted Margaret and told her I'd be really late that night. She responded with barely hidden excitement. At 3 o'clock, I parked 2 blocks from home. Ryan's white pickup appeared at 3:15, right on schedule. I waited until 4 o'clock, giving them time to get comfortable. Then I quietly approached through the backyard. I could hear voices and laughter from upstairs. Moving silently, I went to our bedroom. Margaret's underwear drawer was slightly open. I found the tube exactly where I discovered it. This was the moment of truth. I unscrewed the cap and emptied the gel into our bathroom sink. Then I refilled the tube with industrial superglue. The substitution was perfect. I placed the tube back and positioned my electronic devices. The Bluetooth speaker went behind our living room couch. The modified smoke detector was already installed. I could still hear them upstairs, completely unaware that justice was about to be served. Everything was in position. I slipped back out and returned to my truck 2 blocks away. Now I just had to wait for them to use Margaret's preparation, wait for the industrial adhesive to do its work. From my truck, I watched our house. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows. Nobody had any idea our quiet Tampa suburb was about to witness the scandal of the decade. At 5:15, I heard Margaret's drawer open. For several minutes, there were only soft sounds. Then at 5:23, everything changed. Ryan's voice suddenly became tense. Margaret asked what he meant. He said they were literally stuck together. Margaret's voice rose to panic. I could hear them struggling, their voices escalating from confusion to fear to outright panic. The industrial superglue was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Their panic was satisfying. Now it was time for the real show. I opened the app on my phone and pressed the button. Immediately, the modified smoke detector began shrieking. The piercing alarm echoed through our neighborhood. I activated the Bluetooth speaker. Suddenly, terrifying sounds of people screaming for help began broadcasting from inside our house. The recorded voices sounded desperate and authentic. Within seconds, neighbors began emerging from their houses. Mrs. Martinez dropped her garden hose and ran toward our house. Mr. Kim grabbed his phone and called emergency services, reporting people trapped inside. More neighbors appeared. Within minutes, half the neighborhood was gathered on our front lawn. Mrs. Martinez asked where the smoke was. The recorded distress calls continued broadcasting. From my truck, I could see Ryan's pickup in our driveway. The neighbors were starting to notice. Mrs. Martinez said slowly that it looked like Ryan's truck. I could practically see the pieces clicking together in their minds. That's when the sirens began. Leading the convoy was Rescue Unit 12, Amanda's unit. I watched my daughter jump out in her paramedic supervisor uniform. She had no idea she was about to walk into the most devastating moment of her life. Amanda called out, asking what the situation was. Mr. Kim shouted back about people trapped inside, screaming. Amanda began directing her team. The sledgehammer crashed against our front door. Amanda led her medical team inside while firefighters followed. From upstairs came Ryan's muffled, desperate voice. Amanda's head snapped up. That voice was familiar. She took the stairs 2 at a time. Amanda turned the doorknob and pushed open the door. What she saw made her freeze completely. Ryan, her husband, was in bed with Margaret, her mother. They were unclothed, clearly panicked, and somehow physically connected. For a moment, Amanda's mind couldn't process what she was seeing. Ryan's voice was barely a whisper. Margaret said they were stuck. Amanda stood in the doorway staring at the two people who had just destroyed her entire world. Captain Wilson appeared behind her. Amanda's training finally kicked in. She stepped into the room, her voice coldly professional. She called for medical supplies. Ryan tried to reach for her. She stepped back and told him not to speak. As her team brought supplies, Amanda worked with mechanical precision. She'd separated people from industrial adhesives before, but never her own mother and husband. While Amanda worked upstairs, I played my role perfectly outside. The crowd of neighbors had grown larger. Mrs. Martinez whispered she couldn't believe this. Mr. Kim looked at me with sympathy. I stood among them, the picture of a devastated husband. I said I didn't understand any of this. Old Mr. Bennett patted my shoulder sympathetically. More neighbors arrived. People were pulling out phones, recording everything. Someone shouted they were coming out. The front door opened and Amanda emerged first. Behind her, paramedics wheeled out a stretcher. Ryan was on it, his face visible and bright red with humiliation. The neighbors pressed closer. Camera phones flashed. Mrs. Martinez called out asking Ryan how he could do this. A second stretcher appeared with Margaret also covered but clearly mortified. Mrs. Parker announced loudly that she was shocked. The crowd murmured agreement with their sympathy clearly with me. I had become the victim. I called out to Amanda asking what hospital. She said Tampa General and added she was so sorry. I replied that none of us could have known. As the ambulances pulled away, I stood surrounded by neighbors. The entire street had witnessed Ryan and Margaret's public humiliation. Ryan's reputation was destroyed. Margaret's betrayal was public knowledge. Perfect. 2 hours later, I sat in Tampa General's waiting room. Amanda appeared emotionally drained. I asked how they were. She said physically fine. Doctors used acetone to separate them. Some skin irritation, but no permanent damage. I asked if I could see Margaret. I found Margaret's room and knocked. She started crying when she saw me. She said she was so sorry. I sat down looking hurt, asking how long. She whispered 6 months. I said whatever problems we had, we could have worked through them. A nurse entered with a small tube, telling Margaret to apply this healing gel. Margaret placed it on her bedside table. I said I should let her rest. Once in the hallway, I ducked into a supply closet. From my jacket, I pulled out concentrated capsaicin cream from Home Depot's pest control section, nearly identical to the healing gel. I waited 10 minutes, then slipped back into Margaret's room. She was dozing. Working quickly, I switched the tubes. The capsaicin cream looked identical. I pocketed the real gel and left silently. I walked to Ryan's room and knocked. Ryan looked up with shame and fear. I entered looking hurt and confused, asking how he could do this. A nurse entered with an identical tube of healing gel. Ryan took it and set it on his bedside table. When I was sure Ryan was distracted, I excused myself. I slipped back into his room when he dozed off and quickly switched his healing gel with capsaicin cream. Now both would experience burning consequences. An hour later, the screaming began. Margaret's voice was high-pitched with panic. Seconds later, Ryan's voice called for a nurse. Amanda jumped up immediately. We rushed toward the rooms. Margaret was writhing in her bed, tears streaming, desperately trying to wipe something off. She screamed the gel was like fire. In the next room, Ryan was having an identical reaction. Amanda shouted to get milk immediately. The medical staff worked frantically. Margaret and Ryan were crying from pain, their skin bright red. I stood watching with deep satisfaction. As the medical team treated the burns, I noticed Mrs. Martinez had arrived looking agitated. She marched toward us. She said she had something important to tell me about Ryan. Amanda asked what she meant. Helen said Amanda's husband wasn't who she thought. She revealed Ryan had been having an affair with her for 8 months, claiming he took $15,000. Amanda staggered backward. Helen continued explaining she'd made calls. Ryan had been dating Catherine Wong, Barbara Thompson, Dorothy Sullivan. Amanda asked how many women. Helen replied at least 6. Catherine gave him over $30,000. Barbara had been paying his rent. Dorothy bought him a truck thinking it was an engagement gift. 2 more women appeared, Catherine Wong and Barbara Thompson. They'd come when they heard Ryan was hospitalized. Barbara said Ryan told her Helen was just a neighbor. Helen replied he told her the same about Barbara. The women stared at each other. I said we needed to compare notes. For the next hour, Ryan's victims shared their stories. The pattern was identical. Dorothy admitted he helped her update her will, making him a beneficiary. Catherine said $50,000 for her. When Barbara mentioned Ryan having bank access, Amanda said we needed to call the police. Helen said she already did. Through Ryan's door, we could hear him trying to make phone calls. Detective Collins stepped out. Ryan's con game was officially over. Detective Collins listened to each woman's story. He entered Ryan's hospital room, saying he needed to speak with him about fraud and conspiracy. Ryan tried to sit up and said he didn't know what the detective was talking about. Detective Collins replied this was for a business that didn't exist, explaining they'd checked. The detective mentioned the life insurance policy and said they had recordings. Ryan's eyes went wide. The detective said they had voice-activated digital recorders with clear audio. Detective Collins announced Ryan was under arrest for fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and elder abuse. Even with painful hands, Ryan was cuffed to his bed. In the next room, the partner informed Margaret she was under arrest. Amanda stood beside me watching. She asked how I knew to record them. I explained I found the device after the fire department left, and it must have been activated by the commotion. Amanda accepted it completely. Over the next days, the story exploded across Tampa. Ryan's photo was everywhere. The neighborhood rallied around me. Casseroles appeared daily. Mrs. Martinez organized a support group. The community saw me as the ultimate victim. Ryan was denied bail. The prosecutor found evidence in 3 other states. He was facing 25 years. Margaret was released on bail. I filed for divorce and kept everything. Ryan's victims got justice. Catherine sued for her money. Barbara pressed charges. Dorothy got her truck back. Ryan was finished. 2 weeks later, Amanda moved back home. We sat on our porch watching the sunset. She said she was sorry she brought Ryan into our family. I told her she couldn't have known. Predators like Ryan were experts at deception. She said she felt stupid. I reassured her she was a good person who trusted someone she loved. Amanda smiled for the first time since the scandal. She said she was glad we had each other. I squeezed her hand, feeling genuinely happy. Ryan and Margaret had tried to destroy our family but only made us closer. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making breakfast, listening to the news. The anchor reported Ryan's sentencing, 28 years in federal prison. Amanda said he got what he deserved. Our routine had become comfortable. Amanda worked her shifts and I'd return to Home Depot part-time. The neighborhood had embraced us. Mrs. Martinez had become like family. Ryan's victims had formed a support group and recovered most of their money. Amanda said she'd been thinking about moving into her own place soon. I said that sounded perfect. That afternoon at Home Depot, my co-workers treated me with respect and amazement. My assistant manager said using super glue to catch cheaters was genius. I replied it was just problem solving. But privately, I was proud. Ryan had been a professional predator. Margaret had been willing to murder her husband. They'd both gotten what they deserved. That evening, Amanda and I sat on our porch watching the sunset. She asked if I ever regretted how everything happened. I said I regretted she had to see what she saw, but I didn't regret they faced consequences. I said the important thing was we survived and we're stronger now. She agreed. As the sun set, I felt genuine contentment. Ryan was in prison where he belonged. Margaret was facing legal consequences. The women Ryan victimized were getting justice. Amanda and I had built something stronger than what Ryan and Margaret tried to destroy. Sometimes justice comes from courts, sometimes from community, and sometimes from a 64-year-old Home Depot manager who refuses to be anyone's victim. Ryan thought he could destroy my life. Instead, he only made it stronger. If this story resonated with you emotionally, or brought back memories of your own encounters with deception and vindication, we'd love to hear your perspective in the comments section. Have you ever found yourself confronting someone who misjudged your capabilities? Make sure to follow our channel to access additional remarkable authentic accounts, exploring bravery, fairness, and familial connections. Your engagement enables us to share these compelling stories with a wider audience,